everyone, I'm Gertie and welcome to a new month of content on Patreon. I'm so excited about what we're bringing you this month. It is a swing coat project. I've wanted to do a swing coat pattern forever, and I was very inspired by the marvelous Mrs. Maisel. If you guys are fans of that show, you know she has like 100 amazing coats, all in different colors that she wears throughout the series. And I have wanted one for myself, so I'm really excited to be able to do this project for you. So there are two versions included with the pattern. There's a long version with inseam pockets, which is very midge, and then there's this short version with patch pockets, which is a little more casual. So I'm going to take you through the sewing of the short version today, which you see on the mannequin. It has one buttonhole, and I did a bound buttonhole. And that kind of allows it to swing open if you want, and see your fabulous lining here. I did a nice pop of red on the inside. And the thing I really like about this project is that it's a great first coat project for beginners at tailoring and coat making. Because as you can see, there's no notched collar, shawl collar, rolled collar, any of that. It's just a really simple stand right here. And this was based off of the one that Midge wears in the series. So I love this simple stand, one buttonhole, and you can do a snap if you're not up for doing buttonholes yet. You can make it really simple for yourself. Like I said, the two patch pockets, that's just for the short version. A nice swing shape, shoulder darts in the front and the back. And then these sleeves, which I'm very excited about. I love a big dramatic sleeve, as you probably know. You may not know that I also love a big chunky cuff. So I wanted to make sure that with this pattern, we got a beautiful satin sleeve that has a slight bell shape to it. And then this big old cuff. And I really like the way that we drafted this. It's a cuff that's attached to the sleeve, and then the lining sewn on the inside, and then you just roll the cuff to the outside. So I'm going to take you through every step of sewing that sleeve because we haven't done it here before. But there's a lot of other skills in this pattern that you should be really comfortable with, but I'm just going to take you through the main steps of sewing. But first, let's get started talking about supplies and fabric. Let's get right into supplies. So I did want to mention before we get started that if you're curious about tailoring, what it is, the different skills and techniques involved, this is a great book that I really recommend. I used to teach from it. It's called Tailoring, the Classic Guide to Sewing the Perfect Jacket. And it takes you through all of the different supplies, tools, and techniques. And it's just a really great book and also super affordable. So I will give you a link to this in the instructions. So that said, let's talk about the supplies that you need for this project. Today, I'm going to be making the short version of the swing coat. So this is more a jacket version, but the supplies are largely the same for the long or short versions. So you're going to need one button. This coat just has one little button at the top, and it's meant to kind of like swing open, hence the name swing coat. You could add more buttons if you wanted to, but I've designed it with just the one. So one 1-inch button. You're going to need interfacing. And I will link you to my favorite interfacing supplier, which is Fashion Sewing Supply. I mention them a lot in these videos. And the one I'm using today is called Pro Weft Supreme Light. Weft is a great interfacing for tailoring. Let me show you the texture just a little bit more. It's somewhat sheer. It is fusible. You can feel the glue on this side. And it comes in different weights. And a lot of different manufacturers make it, so you could look up weft interfacing and find this. It usually comes in this natural color as well as black. So you're going to need that for your facing pieces and your cuffs. And then let's talk about fabric. I'm going to be using this really beautiful Harris tweed today, which is just a beautiful, luxurious
fabric. Comes in a lot of different tartans and solids and herringbones, and it's really lovely to work with. Any sort of wool coating would be a great choice for this project. Anything that has a little bit of body to it, but is not too stiff, because you do want it to swing and drape beautifully. I know you're going to ask me if you can use polar fleece, because you always do. And I have to say, I think this project would probably be a good candidate for polar fleece if you want to give it a try. But really intended for wool coatings. So look around, see what you can find. Tweeds are a really great choice for this short version. You're going to need lining fabric as well. And I did want to talk about your lining options here. I'm using this really shiny, satiny red for my lining. And this is called a sunback lining, or a flannel back satin. So you can see very shiny on one side, and then on the opposite side, the wrong side, it's matte and has a sort of fuzzy flannel texture. It's also called kasha lining sometimes. I don't know why. But what this does is it gives you this slippery lining side against your body, and then the inside has a bit of insulation for warmth. And I did just want to mention, if you want to add warmth to your swing coat, there are some other options you have as well. And also in general, any lining fabric would work for this coat, as long as it is just a little bit durable. You don't want anything too thin or that looks like it might tear easily, because you all know replacing a lining in a jacket is not fun. Okay, so that's your kasha lining. Comes in a lot of different colors. I will link you to this. Some other options I found, if you wanted to use one lining fabric that had a little bit of insulation to it, would be a quilted lining fabric. I got this from B&J. Again, I'll give you a link. I thought this would be really fun for the short version of the swing coat. It will make it really super cozy and toasty. Has a lining fabric on one side and then batting on the other. This would add a bit of stiffness to your coat and a little bit of bulk, so do consider that. If you're curious how it's going to drape with your fabric, just put some swatches together and see how the two fabrics move together. And then you also have the option of adding a layer of insulation to your lining. So there's Thinsulate, which is probably the most well-known brand name insulation for outerwear. And you can buy this by the yard. I got this at Vogue Fabrics. And you can cut this out of your lining fabrics and baste it together with your lining pieces, so that you've created an insulated lining fabric on your own, which is nice if you want to use like a beautiful print or something like that for your lining. So that's one option. And then the second option would be lamb's wool. I got this from B&J, and this is what the tailoring book recommends. It's really light, has a beautiful drape and loft to it. So this would be a nice option too, to just add a little bit extra insulation to your swing coat. All right, so those are just a few tips on adding warmth. Next, let's talk about where we are in the process of constructing your coat. Here's one of my coat front pieces. These are not interfaced. If you've made the princess coat, you'll know that the coat front is completely interfaced. On this pattern, it's not, okay? But what I did do was make my bound buttonhole already, and I put a patch of interfacing where I made the buttonhole. So just a little square there to reinforce the buttonhole area. All right, so there's my bound buttonhole made already, and we did provide you with a pattern piece for making the bound buttonhole again, just like on the princess coat. So if you want to make bound buttonholes, or a bound buttonhole, I should say, go ahead and do that. You can also just as easily do machine buttonholes if your sewing machine does a good machine buttonhole on thick fabrics. Keep that in mind. There's gonna be a lot of thickness in there. Another option is you could just do a snap, one big 1-inch snap. And you could even put a decorative button on the outside, so you get a sort of like faux buttonhole closure. All right, I have already sewn my shoulder dart on the front, trimmed it and cut it open and pressed it open. And now we're gonna look at the back, because I'm gonna show you one dart start to finish. I've already sewn my center back seam, right? There are two back pieces, sewed the center back seam. And hopefully you can see here that I've marked my dart in with blue chalk. And I'm just going to start by folding this piece together in preparation of sewing my dart. I'm gonna match those little notches there, and I'm gonna pin along my dart leg. And the first bit of sewing we're gonna do together is I'm gonna take this over to the machine and sew my dart, and we'll talk about pressing and cutting it open.
All right, so I've pinned my dart and now I'm ready to sew it. And I just wanted to mention there are 2 darts on the back. There's 1 on each shoulder. So we're gonna do 1 dart first and then repeat the process for the second. Okay, so here we go. I have my machine set at 2.5 for the length. And I'm starting stitching at the raw edge. I'm gonna back stitch here. And just follow my little blue chalk line. You probably can't see it on this plaid, but it's there. And then I have this horizontal pin here to let me know where to stop. And as I always say on darts, you're just going to gradually, very, very gradually veer off the fabric and then leave yourself some tails and tie a knot here rather than back stitching at the point. Okay, so now let's go to the ironing board and we will talk about cutting this and pressing it open. So I'm going to use my tailor's ham here just to be able to press this curve nice and flat. And what I like to do with thick fabrics like coating, that if you press them to the side, and especially if you have 2 darts on top of each other, you're going to have 6 layers of thick fabric right there. What I would recommend is cutting this dart open instead so that you can press it open and flat. So just trim as far as you can down there. You don't have to get all the way to the point. And then we are going to press this. And with wool, I would recommend always pressing from the inside or the wrong side of the fabric. And wool responds really well to steam. This is one of the reasons I really love sewing with wool, is it just will basically do whatever you want it to if you just give it a little bit of steam. And wool just shapes really beautifully. That's why it's really commonly used for tailored garments. So just press that tip nice and flat. And there you go. You've got a nice pressed dart that won't create too much bulk when you sew this shoulder seam together with the back where there's also a shoulder dart. Okay, so you're going to do your shoulder dart on the other side of the back. So I'm going to let you go ahead and do that. Next thing I want to talk about is pockets. So there are 2 styles of pockets for this design. For the long swing coat, we've given you an inseam pocket for the side seams. And then because the short jacket is too short for inseam pockets, we've given you some cute little patch pockets. So let's talk about sewing those real quickly. What you're going to do is you're going to put your pocket outer right sides together with your pocket lining, like so. And you should see that your lining is slightly smaller than your pocket outer, which is what you want because that's going to help the pocket outer roll in. Okay, so what we're going to do is pin these edges together. And you can see what's happening here is when I match the raw edges, now on this side it's scooting even further away. So I'll show you how to deal with that. What we're going to do is now make these raw edges match, which is going to make this other side lift up, which is totally fine. Totally fine, don't worry. I'm going to pin these raw edges together. And now what we're going to do, oh, you're going to want to pin the upper edge as well too. What you're going to want to do is stitch around the upper edge here, and you're going to stitch around all the edges, but you're going to leave yourself a little 2-inch gap. I'm going to do mine about right here. So you might remember my tip from one of my last videos. I think it was the mask video. We talked about this last, where
I do a little cross with my pins if I know I want to leave an opening, right? And that just, the two pins crossed over each other just reminds me that I need to stop. Okay, so I'm gonna start at one of my cross pins, go all the way around, pivot at each of these corners, and then we will be ready to trim the pocket right side out. Well, we're gonna trim it first, but you know what I mean. Okay, so here we are, stitching the pocket. Take these pins out. And because of the difference in size of the lining and the outer pocket, you're going to see these raw edges try to slip away from each other. So you just have to control them as you're stitching and make those raw edges match. Coming up to my X mark here. So I'm just going to backstitch. Okay, so what we're gonna do is trim away the seam allowances. I'm gonna trim this down to about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little wider. And then I'm holding my scissors at a little grade here, at an angle to sort of grade those seam allowances. Trim away from the corners. And you want to leave the seam allowances intact around your opening here. And the other thing I would recommend is that you might want to do some little notches around those outer curves. Just a few should be fine. All right, and now we're going to turn our pocket right side out. So through that opening, and then you can just use your finger to kind of push those corners out. And what you should be seeing is that your lining is really rolling to the inside of the pocket. So that's exactly what we want, because when we top stitch it on the jacket, we don't want to see any of that red lining around the edge. Okay, so I'm just gonna give this a nice press, like that, get it nice and flat. I'm gonna turn in the seam allowance at the bottom curve here where the opening is. And you can just check that from the outside and make sure it looks nice. You can turn that in, and then I'm gonna hand stitch that close. And I'm gonna get this pressed nice and flat. I'm gonna get my press cloth because this satin is not gonna like that high heat. So I'm gonna get my press cloth, press this nice and flat, close up that little opening there, and then we're gonna go back over the table and we're going to place the pockets on the jacket fronts. So I've already placed the left side pocket and stitched it so you can see what it's going to look like finished. And I did just want to make a note about these pockets. They're the shape I borrowed from a vintage coat that I really love, but also made it taller so you can fit an iPhone in here. So that's why we made this particular shape and size. But I did want to say, you know, if you have a preferred size, or you want it wider or deeper, whatever you want to do with the pocket, this is an easy pattern change to make. So have fun with it. Okay, so I have not stitched the other side yet. So I'm just going to show you how I placed it. I matched the pattern markings. And what you're gonna see is there's going to be a little bit of extra ease right here. Like the pocket is just gonna raise slightly away from the coat front. And the reason for that is so that you can actually put things into the pocket so that it has a little bit of built-in room there. Okay, so once you match your pattern markings, then you're going to place pins all the way around, and then you're going to go to your machine and you're going to top stitch this, really edge stitch, like just a scant 1/8 of an inch away, all the way around that lower curved edge. Okay, so easy peasy, that's your pocket. If you're doing the full length swing coat, then you're going to do your inseam pockets next. And I'm not going to show you those because those are super easy and they will be detailed in the instructions. So just showing you the patch pockets today. Go ahead and do your inseam pockets if you're doing them. And our next step here is to do the seams for the shoulder and the side seams. I just noticed I still have this dart left to do, so I will do that next. But what we're going to do is put the coat fronts and the coat back together at the shoulder seam. So right here, you're gonna match your darts and you're gonna match this curve right here. And we're gonna stitch along there at 5/8 of an inch. And next thing you're going to do is your side seams. So from the armhole down to the hem, if you cut out your plaid to match, then you'll want to just make sure that your lines are matching when you pin it, and then you're going to stitch your side seams. So those are the next steps. Obviously I have to do my other dart first, but then I'm going to go do my shoulder seams and my side seams and press those seams open.
So I've done the stitching I need to do on my pocket, finished that dart that I forgot about, and so now I'm ready to sew my seams. So I'm going to start with my shoulder seams, and I'm starting at the outer shoulder here. I'm making sure my raw edges are matching at the 5/8 of an inch line, and I'm at a normal stitch length, back stitch. And as you go over your darts, just make sure that your darts stay matched up and that they stay pressed open. Okay, so don't let the presser foot kind of push them to the side, or so they're pressed closed. And then just follow the curve of the neckline here. And there you go. And that curve is what creates that nice little subtle funnel shape. Okay, so there's one side of the neckline. I'm going to do the same on the other shoulder seam. Okay, there we go. And now side seams. So I've pinned my side seams, and because I'm matching a plaid at the side seam, I put a lot of pins, and I put a pin on each sort of bar of this plaid and made sure it was matching on the opposite side. And when I'm sewing a plaid that I want to match up, I will always take my pins out a lot later than I normally do. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm just going to get as close as I can to that pin without actually sewing over it, and then take it out, so that my plaid remains matched up the way that I pinned it. Stitch. So now it's time to press. We're going to press our side seams open. So I'm going to get rid of the
ham here for the side seams. And I always just check that my plaid is matching up the way I want it to, and that looks pretty good. With a side seam, you know, that has some flare to it, you're always gonna get that sort of slight chevron, so it's not gonna be a perfect, you know, straight across matching of the plaid. So this looks pretty good to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and press this open. Running out of water here, but you can use a lot of steam on wool. So I'm going to repeat that same thing on the other side seam, and let's just talk about the shoulder seams here while we're close to this one. Not a bad idea to use the ham here to just get a sort of raised surface, and also because this is a curve here. Now, the thing you'll notice about this is that, you know, it's an inner curve, but you probably don't need to clip it if you're using a really malleable wool like this tweed I'm using, because as you'll see, as you work with wool more and more, it will just kind of bend to your will, and it will just sort of reshape itself, and you don't even need to clip it, which is nice. But if you're using something more structured, maybe you're using, like, you know, I think I put in the instructions, I think this would make a really fun beach coat, like very Jane Russell, in like a cotton sateen if it's summer where you are. So if you're using a cotton sateen, you're definitely going to need to clip this little curve right here. But for the wool, I don't think I'm going to need it, because it's just going to shape itself with the steam and the pressing. So I will probably turn it around so that I can press from each side of the curve here, like that. You can see my darts here where they meet. Those are those shoulder darts. And if you're noticing that your fabric isn't quite conforming to the shape the way you want it to, you can certainly give it some clips here. There you go. Okay, so I'm just going to continue pressing. I'm going to do the other side, my shoulder seam and my side seam. All right, it's time to move on to sleeves. And I thought it would be helpful, since we haven't done this type of cuffed sleeve before, to take you through the pattern pieces and how they fit together. So, you know, as I always say, I'm looking at an early version of the pattern that is not designed in the way it will be for you. Obviously, you'll have a really pretty version, but this will help illustrate what the pattern pieces are going to look like and how they go together. So this is the cuff, right? It's a pretty big piece because it's going to get folded like this, and then this goes inside the sleeve as like a little facing, okay? So what I want you to note is that on one, it's kind of a rectangle, but then one side kind of tapers in a little bit and has two notches on one side. This is the side that gets sewn to the sleeve lining piece. So if I pull out my sleeve lining piece, this is the hem of it. Here's the cap up here. You can see that those notches are going to match each other, okay? So double notch matches the sleeve lining. On the other side, now I had to make a little correction here, so just pay attention to that pink mark right there. On the other side, you'll only see one notch, and that means that this side gets sewn to the sleeve itself, to the hem, okay? So this side, you're gonna look at the sleeve pattern piece, look at the hem, you should find one notch, and these two will match each other. All right, so I just want you to be aware of how all those pieces go together. The first thing we're going to do is sew our cuffs to our sleeves. And it's super simple, so don't worry too much about how these go together, because it's very, very easy. It's like a lot easier than it looks from looking at the coat. So I've already sewn my underarm seam on my sleeves, and I've done the easing on the sleeve cap with a line of double stitching that's 5 millimeters long, and then just pulled it up to ease the sleeve cap, okay? And I did want to mention, you know, in the princess coat video, the jacket video on YouTube, I show you another method for easing a sleeve cap, which uses a bias strip, which I really like too. So definitely check that out if you're looking for alternate methods of easing a sleeve cap. Okay, so that's sewn. I've done both my sleeves, and then I have also sewn my cuffs. All right, so I've sewn the underarm seam on the cuff as well. So then you're gonna have one side with a single notch and one side with a double notch. And you'll remember from what we just talked about, the double notch matches the sleeve lining hem. The single notch will match the sleeve itself. Okay, so I have two cuffs that are sewn and interfaced. And we're going to sew the cuff to the sleeve first. So what you need to do is make sure that you've got the right side. So just, you know, take your time with this like I'm doing. I'm kind of like inspecting both sides. This is the lining side because it has a double notch. This is the single notch, and then I'm just making sure that my plaids match up. Okay, great. So what I'm gonna do is put my sleeve inside the cuff so that they're right sides together. And then I'm going to match the seam allowances where the underarm goes. And then I'm gonna match that single notch like so. Okay, and then just place pins around this. So obviously we'll be using the free arm of our machine to sew these two pieces together because it's sort of a tight little circle there. So I'm going to do the same thing, pinning the cuff to the sleeve on my other set of pattern pieces for the other sleeve. And then we're going to go over to the machine and we're going to sew this in the round.
All right, let's go ahead and sew our cuffs to our sleeve in the round. So I'm just going to put it on the free arm of my machine like this. I'm starting at this where those two seams meet on top of each other. Okay, meeting up with my stitching where I started and back stitching. There's Mr. Jingles. Okay, so I'm just going to show you one sleeve and we'll go from there. So the next thing, hi Henry, the next thing we're going to do is press this seam open. So from the wrong side, I'm going to just pull the sleeve out. So pull the sleeve out and then we're going to press this seam open. So as you can imagine, it's going to help to put something in there like a seam roll. Hattie was just growling at Henry. Hattie, I hope they didn't hear that. Very naughty. Okay, so we're just going to press this seam open. Oh, I need to up my temperature here. Bless you, Henry. Okay, so I'm just going to go around like this, pressing this seam open. So this will just take a minute. Okay. That seam is now pressed open, and that's all you have to do for now. And this sleeve is going to look kind of crazy
because it's gonna look super, here, I'm gonna turn it right side out. Henry, please. Mommy's doing a video. I'm gonna turn it right side out, and you'll see it just looks like a super, super long sleeve. But what's going to happen is when we go to do the lining will get sewn to the right side, and then this will get kind of pulled inside. Then it's gonna get turned out to create a cuff. But this is all you need to do for now. And the next thing we're gonna do is set it into the jacket. Obviously I have another sleeve seam to sew, but you guys don't need to see that. So here is my jacket. And we're going to set the sleeve into the jacket. So you're going to look for your notches here. If it's a set of double notches, that means that it's the back of the sleeve and it matches the jacket back. So that would make this my left sleeve. All right, so when I'm setting in sleeves, I always like to have everything right side out when I'm matching it. And I start by taking the underarm seam on the sleeve and the underarm seam on the jacket and matching those two together, right sides together. And then I start by putting a pin inside the jacket, okay, not inside the sleeve. Then I find the notch at the top of my sleeve cap. There's a single notch right here where the shoulder seam will match the sleeve. I find that, find the shoulder seam, and then I'm going to turn the jacket so that the wrong side is facing me like that, and then match those two match points together. The notch to the seam. Like that. And then we're going to be working from the inside of the jacket. So I know this is a lot, but you're looking at a circle right here. And you're going to start by matching your notches. So you should have a single notch in the front, your little double set of notches in the back, like we talked about. And again, keep placing those pins so that they're inside the jacket, not inside the sleeve. And then you're just going to make sure that your easing, that little ruffling right there, is evenly distributed around the shoulder. So you're looking for those two, and mine looks pretty good. You're looking for those two to match. Actually, what I need to do here, here's a good example. See how this is the jacket itself. And see how it's so much longer than that ruffle piece? That means that I need to reduce the amount of easing. Okay, so I'm just going to release it a little bit. Henry's now scratching on his scratching post. All right, so now I'm releasing that a little bit so that they match. And then I can pin them together. Okay, and so like I always say, if you've heard me talk about setting in sleeves before, what you're looking for is for that ruffling there, but you don't want to actually see any like little crimps or pleats along the seam line, okay? So just put as many pins as you feel like you need around your armhole, and then we're gonna sew this in the round, just like we did with the cuff. And I always like to start at the underarm when sewing my sleeves. So I start pinning at the underarm seam and I start sewing at the underarm seam. So 5/8 of an inch, make sure you're on your usual 2.5 stitch length. And so I have the jacket side on top and the eased sleeve on the bottom. So I feel like that just helps me ease this in a little more smoothly by having the easing on the bottom. It's my shoulder seam. here I am coming to meet up with where my stitching started at the underarm seam. Okay, I'm gonna break my stitching, and then the first thing I do after I set in a sleeve is I turn it right side out like this, and I just look for any puckers or pleats at the sleeve cap right here. And if it looks good, then I'm good to go to the next step, which I am. And the next step is from the inside, you are going to trim down the seam allowances between the sets of notches here, okay? So like we said, you should have a double set of notches in the back, a single notch in the front. So what you're gonna do is you're going to take your scissors, and at that single notch in the front, you're just gonna clip in like that, and you're gonna trim that seam allowance down to 1/4 inch. And that's just going to allow you to have a greater range of movement, the range of movement that the pattern intended you to have, because if you have too much seam allowance down here, it's going to restrict the armhole quite a bit. Okay, so there's my double notch. All right, so voila. We have one set in sleeve with a really long cuff on it. So I'm gonna do the same steps with my other sleeve. Sew the cuff on, set the sleeve in, and then the next thing we're gonna talk about is sewing our facings and our lining. All right, now that we have got our sleeves into our jacket, it's time to work on our facings. And the method that I'm going to be showing you today is, if you made the princess coat or the princess jacket, it's the same method in which we're going to put the facing unit together, then put it onto the jacket. I just find that more manageable in terms of being able to understitch and make the window for my bound buttonhole and all of that. And then we will construct the lining separately, attach the lining to the facings, which are already attached to the jacket. Okay, so what I have here, what we're looking at, is the back neck facing, which is interfaced, and the front facings, also interfaced. I went ahead and stitched them together at the shoulder seams. You can see it has that same neckline curve that we had on the jacket itself. Press those seams open, and now we're gonna pin this to the jacket. So let me just lay my jacket out here. And I'm gonna take this facing unit and put it right sides together, shoulder seam to shoulder seam, and this shoulder seam to the opposite shoulder seam. And you'll notice that the coat itself, or the jacket itself, has a center back seam on the back jacket, but the facing doesn't, since it was cut on the fold. So you'll have one seam allowance on the jacket, but none on the facing. I put pins there, and then you'll just pin along this curved edge on both sides of the front opening, all the way down. I'm just going to give you a view of what I'm talking about. All the way down to the hem. Okay, so I'm going to pin all the way around so that I have the facing connected to the jacket. And then we're going to go over to the machine and sew these together. All right, everyone, we are ready to sew our facing to our jacket. And I just want to hold mine up so you can see what a big piece this is. And obviously, if you're doing the long version, you would have a lot of coat going on here. So I just have my facing right sides together with my coat. We're going to start stitching at one hemline and go all the way around the neck to the other hemline. Okay, so you're going like in a U shape. So just start at the bottom here, 5/8 of an inch, checking my seam length, I'm good, back stitch. And yeah, this is just one long seam here. So just keep going all the way around, and we're going to end the opposite hemline. if you've watched a lot of my videos, you can probably guess what's coming next. And that is first that we are going to grade our seam allowances, and then we are going to clip and or notch any curves. And then we're going to understitch. But first I'm going to fix this one little spot where my seam allowances kind of collapsed on themselves here. Okay, so let's do this on the ironing board. Now we have two seam allowances here, right? The facing is going to be the shorter one. So we're going to trim these down, starting with the facing. And you can trim that down to about, it's kind of like between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch. So what's that? 3/16. Just get it in that ballpark. All right, so I'm gonna trim all the way around like that with the facing, and then the coat seam allowance needs to be about 1/8 of an inch taller than that one, right? So we're creating that graded edge. So it's like a little bit of a bevel, like 2 steps up, so that you don't get a ridge when you turn these bulky layers right side out. Okay, so this is a lot of grading to do. I'm gonna keep going around here, trimming my facing down to be the shorter seam allowance, and then following with the coat seam allowance to be the longer seam allowance. Okay, now that you've graded everything, you're going to notch your curve. So really just this curve of the neckline, like right here, I would recommend notching. So just start about there, kind of where the buttonhole mark is, and do some little triangle cuts like this. So remember, we always notch outer curves and clip inner curves. So kind of like that neckline curve we were looking at earlier would have been an inner curve. This is an outer curve. So it has to be notched. All right, so there's the first side. Do the opposite side of the front opening. Okay, fabulous. All right, so after notching and or clipping, the next step is always understitching. So you're gonna take your facing and open it out like this, and we're going to understitch just right here next to that seam line. And you're gonna wanna make sure that your seam allowances are both oriented under the facing. So you're going to be catching the facing itself and then 2 seam allowances underneath it. You're going to be stitching right there, like an 1/8 of an inch, like a scant 1/8 of an inch away from this seam line. Okay, so you don't need to press it first. People always ask me if I press and then understitch, but this tablecloth. It's important to understitch first and then press, because as I always say, your understitching is a pressing tool, and you'll see what I talk about when we get to pressing. So now is a good time to make sure your iron is going to be heated up when we get there. And we're going to start understitching at one side of the front opening at the hem, all the way around in that U shape like we stitched the facing on. Okay, so when understitching, you're going to want to make sure that you're doing this kind of motion, holding this seam line open, like nice and taut here. And as you go, you're going to want to make sure that the seam I always kind of have to flip this up sometimes. Make sure your seam allowances are underneath where you're stitching. You can also just kind of feel it to make sure that they're there. You should feel a little bump right there. Okay, and we're going to stitch all the way around. One front opening, the neckline, the other front opening. Okay, once you're done understitching, now we're going to press. So what you're going to do is work from the inside of the jacket. You're going to take your facing and you're just going to do that motion I always talk about, pushing the understitching out to the edge so that you get a nice crisp edge here. And because I'm working with wool, I'm going to give it a lot of steam to really shape it here. Okay, and see how beautiful that edge is going to look, your front opening. I'm going to go around the front of the jacket like that, continuing around this curve here. So of course you want to pay special attention to this curve because that's a design feature, some might say, that you really want to get a nice crisp look right here. Okay, and then same thing at your back neckline. You have some bulky seams here, so you're just going to keep pushing outwards. I'm just going to keep going around like this, rolling the understitching outward, pressing, giving it some steam. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this on my dress form and just kind of let it sit and let it dry, you know, because I'm giving a lot of steam. So I'll let it dry and then we'll move on to the lining. Okay, so now we can focus on sewing the lining. And I want to show you the things I've already done. Because they're pretty self-explanatory. You're going to prep your sleeve linings the same way you did your coat sleeves. So sew the underarm seam and then do your ease stitching between the sets of notches. So I've done that for both sleeves. And for the coat front, so your two coat front lining pieces, I have sewn my darts, the shoulder darts. And for these, I didn't cut them open like I did on the coat itself because the material is much thinner. So instead, with these darts on the lining, I'm just pressing them towards center front, and for the back, I'll press them towards center back. Okay, so that's all you have to do on the lining fronts. But let's talk about the jacket back lining. So there are two back pieces, center back seam, just like on the jacket itself. So I have them pinned together at center back, right? And I've already sewn my shoulder darts, you can see here, and pressed them towards center back. And I want to talk about the center back seam because there is a pleat in the lining, like there is in most outerwear. You will have a pleat in the lining to give you extra room so you don't feel restricted when you're moving in your coat or your jacket. So the first thing we're going to do, and you can see that I've done already, is pin your center back seam together, and we're just going to stitch this at 5/8 of an inch. We're not going to press it. Next thing we're going to do is you'll have pleat marks at the neckline and at the hemline down here where you're going to stitch. So you're just going to stitch from here down to the end of that pleat line, back stitch, same thing here. And then we'll press this pleat to one side. Okay, so let's go over to the sewing machine and work on those steps, and then the next thing we'll do is stay stitch this neckline, and then we'll be able to put the whole lining together. All right, so we're ready to sew our center back seam on our jacket lining. So I'm starting from the bottom, and we're at 5/8 of an inch. Back stitch at the top, and now you don't need to press it yet. Now we're going to go right back to the bottom, and that pleat line I was talking about, you're going to stitch from the bottom of the pleat line. You're going to back stitch, follow that marked line. When you get to the top, you're going to back stitch and trim those threads. And we're going to do the same thing at the upper pleat line. So just stitch along that pleat line and back stitch on either end. And there we go. So now what we'll do is press this to one side, okay? So at the top here, you have that pleat. You are going to press it to one side. It doesn't really matter which side. Just pick one. And press it to the same side at the bottom. And now what we're going to do is secure the pleat at the bottom and at the top. So let's talk about the bottom here first. We're going to take this back to the sewing machine. And at 1/2 inch, you're just going to stitch the pleat down. Normally I would say that would be a basting stitch, but it's such a small area. I don't think you even really need to bother changing your stitch length. So you're just securing that little pleat right there. And now at the top, we're going to do the same thing, but this line of stitching is going to double as stay stitching. Okay, so you know, if you've ever seen in directions, so we don't need to pin you up there, just pin your pleat in place there. And if you've seen in directions to stay stitch a neckline, that's what we're doing here. We're going to stay stitch at 1/2 inch around here, and that will serve a couple purposes. It's going to stabilize that curve. Going to hold the pleat in place, and then also when we go to do the next few steps, it will allow us to clip into those seam allowances so we can shape the lining to match the facing of the coat. Okay, so you're just going to stitch around this neckline at 1/2 inch. And here's my pleat. And there we go. Okay, so that is your lining back with the pleat. You don't need to press that pleat open. It can just be a nice soft pleat, or you don't have to press it down to get a crease. You just let it be a soft pleat. The next few steps I'm going to do, and you can do on your own, are we're going to take our lining fronts and sew them to the lining back at the shoulder seam. So you're going to take your lining fronts, just like we did with the jacket. Put the lining front down on top of the lining back, sew the shoulder seam, and then the side seams, and make sure that those darts stay pressed towards center front and center back respectively. You're gonna press those seams open, and then you're gonna set your sleeves into your lining. So your lining sleeves get set into your jacket lining the same way you set your sleeves into the outer jacket. Okay, so then you'll have a lining that looks a lot like a little jacket. And the next thing we're gonna do is put the jacket and the lining together. So we're almost there. Okay. All right, everyone. So Henry is here to help you with your next steps. We have our lining completely sewn, and remember we stay stitched, and then I went ahead and clipped around the neckline, the back neckline. Your jacket is sewn, the facing is all turned in, and I went ahead and made my little window for my bound buttonhole on the facing. So just refer back to my princess coat video if you have questions about that. If you're doing a snap, you don't even need to worry about that. Okay, so I'm gonna warn you that the next few steps are a little bit weird, but just go with it. You can do it. The next one is pretty straightforward. So we're just going to be pinning the lining to the facing and stitching them together. So what you're gonna do is open out the facing from the jacket, and then you're going to put the line, it might help it to turn it around like this, and Henry's helping. Thank you, Henry. Turn the jacket around like that so that you can then put these right sides together like this, okay? So this part is pretty straightforward. You're just pinning these edges together. Here's my shoulder seam on one side and on the other side of the neckline, and then here are my clips. You can just kind of spread those to match the curve of the facing. Okay, and now we're gonna continue pinning all the way down. Henry, please. He's knocking things off the table. You're gonna continue pinning all the way down the lining front to the facing front right here, okay? So keep pinning all the way down. So this part, like I said, this part is pretty straightforward. We're gonna go over and sew this together at the machine. It's the sleeve that's a little confusing, all right? So just get through this step, and then we'll come back to the table after we're done sewing this part, and I will take you through the nitty-gritty of that sleeve part. I promise you can do it. Okay, everyone, so let me just hold this up for you. It's getting really big. You can see the lining pinned to the facing, again, around our U shape from hem to hem. Okay, so we're gonna sew these together. Starting at that hem, that lower edge, and just continuing around in that U shape. Just finished stitching all the way around our little U shape there. The next thing I'm going to do is trim down these seam allowances. You don't really have to grade them separately. What I would recommend is just holding your scissors at an angle like this and just kind of trimming it down by half. About like that. Because the lining is going to be fairly thin, I don't really think it's necessary to trim it completely separately to grade it separately from the coat, but you can if you like. So I'm just gonna do this all the way around just to get rid of some of the bulk and the seam allowances. All right, so I finished trimming all the way around there, and the next thing I'm gonna do is turn this right side out. So basically like flip the lining so that it's inside the coat like this. And I'm not going to show this part, but I will just quickly explain it. The next thing you can do, if you like, is just give the lining a light press down so that it's away from the facing. All right, so just to kind of like press it away this way. You don't have to like, you know, really get in there and like press it flat. You just have to get it like sort of, and you, I mean, sometimes I even skip this step because you can see it's just kind of looking nice on its own. Okay, so that is our U shape, our neckline, and our front opening. And now I'm going to explain the sleeves, okay? So the next step we're going to do is to sew the lower edge of the sleeve to, it's the cuff actually. This is technically the cuff, right? Because we sewed the cuff to the sleeve. The lower edge of the cuff to the lower edge of the sleeve lining, okay? But the way you have to do this is a little bit weird. What you're gonna need to do is take the sleeve lining and stuff it inside the sleeve, just like it would be worn, right? So if you had your arm inside your sleeve, it would be like this. All right, and make sure that it's not twisted at all. So now we're going to match the seam on the cuff to the seam on the sleeve lining. Okay, see how these match? And the sleeve and the cuff are going to be a lot longer than the sleeve lining, so you're going to have a lot of excess here, okay? So what you're going to do here is you're going to take these two seam allowances here, and these are eventually going to get sewn so that they're right sides together, like this, right? So what I advise you to do is to pin these together just at this seam line, okay? So you're gonna put a pin just like this so that you know how to orient these together, because we're gonna have to go in through the hem and pull these so that they are actually right sides together and we're able to sew them right sides together. Okay, but did that make sense? I put my sleeve lining into the sleeve just like it would be worn, like you're putting your coat on. I made sure that the sleeve lining wasn't twisted at all. I matched the seam on the cuff to the seam on the lining, and then I put them so that they were right sides together. Okay, so I kind of had to go like that and pin them. All right, so now the next thing I'm going to do is I have a lot of open space at the hem of the coat, right? The coat hem isn't sewn yet. We're going to do that by hand in the last step. So then now I'm going to reach in to all of this through the hem of the coat and then grab the bottom of the sleeve where I pinned it. It's a lot that we're dealing with here, okay? And now you can see where my pin is. And now we're going to pin these edges together. Now we're right sides together. We're gonna pin these together in what's going to be a really bizarre looking thing. It's gonna be like two sleeves meeting each other like this, and the little seam allowances pressed up against each other and then pinning it, and we're gonna sew it in a circle and then pull the sleeve into the coat, okay? I know it's super weird, but I also know you can do it. We've got this. All right, so just keep pinning around that lower edge. Also, I will say, if this is just like confusing the heck out of you and you're so pissed at me right now, the other thing you can do is just sew the sleeve lining by hand. Just turn it in, turn the cuff to the inside, and stitch them together by hand. But I really want you to try this because it makes it more secure, because the sleeves get a lot of wear, okay? So promise me you'll at least try it. Okay, so now I have it pinned together like that. You know, it looks really weird. Okay, and now we're going to stitch them together in like a little circle kind of fashion here. Totally normal, guys. Totally normal everyday sewing. All right, we're gonna back stitch here. And you just have to keep everything out of the way. As you go around. Okay, and now I'm going to be meeting up with where I started my stitching. And stitch. Okay, and if you like, you can trim down this seam allowance like we did with the other ones. Just, you know, hold your scissors at an angle and just grade it slightly. But I want to show you, I'm eager to show you how this is going to work now. What's going to happen is you're going to pull the sleeve back out. And it's going to pull the sleeve lining down inside of it. So what you have is a nice finish on the inside, and you just want to extend this cuff all the way out like this, and you should be seeing your cuff seam right here. And the way this is going to be worn is you're going to turn the cuff up like so. And you can try it on and see how much, depending on your arm length, you want to turn it up. But this is what's going to happen. It's going to have this cool, really chunky cuff while having a sort of turned in facing here and then fully lined. Look how beautiful. So look, it worked. It wasn't too hard, right? So I'm going to go do that sleeve on the other side, and then we're going to go back to the table and talk about hemming this. And that's with sewing on the button. That's the last step. All right, here we go. Okay, now that you have pulled your sleeve lining to the inside and turned your cuff up, all that's left is little finishing things. I say little, but it's like the hem, which is going to take a little time, but you know how to do a hem and the button. So I'm just going to take you through the specifics of this hem, and then you're there. Okay, so what's going to happen here is you're going to press up the coat hem 1 inch. Okay, so go around with your iron and your little seam gauge, measure 1 inch all the way around up to the facing point right here, where it connects to the facing. All right, so all the way around. And then you're going to go to the lining and the facing. You're gonna press it up 1.5 inches all the way around, okay? And then you're going to stitch your coat lining in place. You can do this by hand. I like to do it by hand. That's sort of my preferred way to do tailored hems. But the other good option here might be to do a blind hem. If you're into that, you could get in between these layers, especially in a really textured wool like this. You could do a machine blind hem. So if you don't know how to do that, there are a million tutorials out there. You just need a special presser foot for your machine. Okay, so you're going to hem your outer coat. Then you're going to take your lining and you're going to place it. Okay, so here's the facing, right, where it turns up. You're going to kind of slightly taper it up so that it's not showing on the outside. You don't want it like that. You're going to taper it up. And then where the lining is, you want there to be like a 1/2 inch gap between the two. And then you're just going to get in between these layers and hand stitch. So use a little slip stitch between there. So first thing you would do, obviously, is pin this in place because you don't want to be holding that in place as you go. So I would put your pin like right right about here, you know, and then you can kind of get in between these layers and stitch them together. So you don't want to like stitch it flat. You want the fold to be kind of folded over, right? And then you have a little bit of ease in your lining here. Okay, so that's your hem. You're going to do those steps. And then the final thing is to sew on your button. So you're just going to overlap your coat and see where the button should be placed. There's also a button mark on the pattern, but you might want to try it on and just make sure you like where it's placed, you know, in relationship to the edge. And then you're going to sew your button on by hand, and then you're done. So I hope that you've enjoyed this coat project. Like I told you, it's, you know, in comparison to the princess coat, it's a fairly easy coat, and it has a lot of drama to it. And I'm really excited to show you guys how it's gonna look with like a matching dress underneath. So a really fun thing you can do is make a really, you know, bold statement lining, like a loud floral or something like that, and then make a matching dress so that when you get the effect like Mrs. Maisel, to like open your dress or open your coat and have a matching dress. Very fabulous, very 50s, very 60s. So I hope you love this project, and let me know if you have any questions. All right, I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.